Oh, we're in the game room now.
I got kicked out of the house. All right. How you doing, Lisa? What is that noise?
Sounds like a vacuum.
Are you turning off the fan? All right. I thought I lost everyone.
I know. All I had to do was click stop video, and then everything popped back up.
Okay, cool. All right, 5 more minutes.
Okay. I think they. Oh, okay, bye. I'm getting feedback.
My mic is muted, so it's not me.
Well, we have 3 things turned on here. Your phone, my phone, and my computer.
Well, your computer doesn't have a sound, so it's all on your phone. And you're now live, so if you want to ask him a question. Do you want to ask him a question? I'm going to go get something to drink. Can I bring you something here? I'm going to get something to drink. What would you like?
See what I got? It's good. I don't know how to turn it on. Where's the office?
We're back. I had to move outside,
All right.
but hey, it's COVID-19. You do what you got to do, right?
Right.
You can't stop me, coronavirus. So today we are finishing Cap 10, and there's so much I have to say. And so I'm going to like squeeze in all the other stuff really fast. But I want to show John Chrisman talking about the Shahuk group. He grew up with them. So the Shahuk group is super interesting. And oh, yeah. Wait, what was that? What was the chat? The link for the virtual exhibition on the facade. Oh, perfect. There's a link for the Museum of Us now. So check that out, please. So we're going to show this I think this is the Splinter Group part. Can you see? Wait, let me make sure I'm doing this right. There. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I just want to briefly talk about Peon. So there's a couple things, but I'll talk about Peon right now, and then we'll go on to talk, and we'll finish up on your political career in the casino.
Okay,
So, you want to stretch?
sure.
Let's take a look.
All right. So, all right. So,
Yeah, this was a 3-hour interview, by the way.
So let's just talk about the Splinter Group for a moment, just to get it on record. So the Splinter Group was comprised of 15 people, 12%, and let's see, Louis Banegas was James Sands' brother, and he took his percentage and bought.
That's what I was told.
And then you were raised by the descendants of, or you were associated with these people?
Okay, so Louis Banegas was married to Elizabeth Rodriguez. And so they were related to both of our families, actually. So they had 2 daughters who were first cousins with my grandmother. One was named Elizabeth, also Elizabeth Hine. They called her Libby, and the other one was named Virginia Lunning. They're both passed now. Virgie was the other one they called her. They're both buried in Barona. Their parents and them are in that section as you to your left, as you walk through the gate.
So that's the only thing they got as far as connected. They got burial rights from family members, but they don't have any other rights because they relinquished those rights when they took their money and went off the reservation.
To the left of where that the whole statue and then the pedestal, they're the first row going up that little corridor where that bench is. They're right there. So they never lived on the reservation, is what I was told.
Even when the deal was struck, these people were living in town, right?
Yes.
They never lived in Capitan.
They never lived in Cap 10 from what I was told, no.
Yeah.
My grandma said that as girls, those 2 cousins of hers used to come and visit because the sister would come down to Canales. And so I think one of them had polio. And so she talked about her being uncomfortable with all of that. And then anyway, they always lived in town. And so but she still had a close relationship with those 2. Virginia, or Virgie, used to come to church up here for a good portion of her life. And so even I recollect that, her and her husband. And then she lived to like 99. And then she passed, I want to say, in 2011 or something. But
So one thing that makes a lot of sense to me that they chose to take their portion and move off the reservation because they were never on the reservation.
no, they weren't living here anyway.
So that's why, one thing that I was never told before, that they were never even on the reservation to begin with.
Stories trickled down to where even they had struck a deal with Ramon or something, to where Ramon Ames, that they were to be buried there. That's why, because I think Lewis died in the 50s, and so he was the one buried there. And then, of course, Elizabeth, or Lizzie, as they called her, died in the 80s, and so they buried her there, and then her kids come to follow. And then even Lewis Hine, who was Elizabeth Hine's son, he's buried up there too.
This brings up the question of assimilation. And how did the old timers view those natives who were more assimilated, who lived off the reservation, kind of took the other way? Was there kind of an opinion or a couple opinions about these type of natives who took an assimilated path?
I know that I never heard too many derogatory things. I know that when it came down to it, it seemed like at one point it was the other way around, to where the assimilated ones sort of had a view of the ones that were still practicing, according to what I was told. But you and I didn't live that. Of course, we're too old or too young to have lived all of that. And so they viewed that as not something that their future descendants did not need. They thought it worked against them. So my grandmother broke it down to me a different way. And what she told me was, because my grandmother, of course, was not really educated that far in school. She could read and she could write, but she wasn't very articulate. She spoke Indian very well because her father never spoke English. And so, you know, of course, and she was in the era where you did. So, but when you speak, you mentioned those two names, they did not. One of them was older than her and they did not. She did not speak the language, but her parents did. So I think it was more, the decisions were made for some of these people in that time that they would not need that. So they didn't need to have that.
So you said that your grandmother, which was born in 1913, Mary Pico Hyde, she stated that, this is what you said in a previous interview, that she thought assimilation was better because you're thinking about survival, and the association with our culture, language, and traditions actually hurt us.
She said that she didn't want, she for a period of time in her life, she looked at culture, music, where she didn't want to be associated with it at all. She thought it to be bad because of the ridiculing that went out in mainstream society when she would go to get a job. How there was no, in this day and age, it seems like it is stylish, or it is looked upon in favor to be associated with that, where at that point in those days it was not, she said. So we're speaking of somebody with a mentality in the 30s and 40s where no, they didn't want nothing to do with it. Sure, she spoke her language and everything, but she said she didn't want to know anything about the music. She didn't want to know anything about any of that.
So is it safe to assume that maybe left boarding schools that brought about this change of initiation ceremonies and other things, that the elders thought we might be better off without it?
I think the initiation, if you break it down, is they lost their window of opportunity. So they were initiated at a certain age, but if they were sent off somewhere, they couldn't. And when they came back, you couldn't anymore. And so you had a line between two different types of people like that after that.
So one of the coolest things John said is that the initiation ceremonies ended because of the boarding schools, because they took our people away at the exact moment and you couldn't do it again once you're older. And it was really profound because it's true. You know, and that's right at the moment where our initiation ceremonies went away. And one of the things about the initiation ceremonies too is they were really, really hard. And sometimes you would leave and they said that they wouldn't come back. So you would die. And it was really, they would test you, and they used Jimson weed. That was kind of a later thing. It was introduced by a Liseño. Jimson is, I can't never pronounce it, but it's a Jimson weed ceremony. And Well, I was real cool because what I'm really trying to talk about is assimilation at this point. And we already talked about before how you would say you were Mexican instead or white, anything but native. And one of the things that, you know, all the elders, they made a concerted effort so we wouldn't stop speaking our language. And that was very, very common. It was very uncommon for it to be the other way around. And so there was this concerted effort. We think of it now as like this, you know, differently. Back then they were thinking about survival, getting ahead, getting a decent life. And so whatever you had to do to get there, you did. And the other thing that's cool about John's interview is he talks a lot about singing, peon singing in particular, but no, I mean, Ilsha, which is from the river. There's all kinds of styles. Wildcat. In fact, wildcat was the more prevalent in this area than bird. But wildcat, actually, they say too, had a Rosalie Pinto Robinson interview that Carlene shared me. Thank you, Carlene, where the wildcat song came from Huiapai. There's a rock up there. The legend of the, oops, sorry, I lost you. But anyway, so that's one of the things he really talks about. And bird almost went away because of this. It was like, we don't need that anymore. We don't need our ceremonies. We don't need our language. Put it away. And so now we're having a revival in the 60s and 70s. And we'll talk about that later. And it's beautiful though. Now, you know, you went from 2 singers to now hundreds of bird singers. And it's really cool to be a part of. In language, we're doing that at KCC. So we have this great revival happening. But you always have to look at things in its historical context, and it'll make more sense to you. Let me show another video portion of that. I forgot, wait a second. Where are you? All right, so 218. I was close enough. Wait a second. Where are you? All right. Share screen. Quick time.
At any given moment, you work for a different company, and if you know, I mean, if you have to take time off or something like that, yeah, it counts against you sometimes. Especially this other company I work for. I mean, if you have to take time off or something like that, yeah, it counts against you sometimes. Especially, I was going to do it no matter what, but it makes me feel better that I don't have that hanging over my head. At any given moment, you work for a different company, and if you know, I mean, if you have to take time off or something like that, yeah, it counts against you.
So my question was about bird and singing, because when you're a singer, your life is dedicated to that, and that's called your gourd is your first wife, and so my question is like, how does that work, you know, in a modern society, with, you know, you can't just take a weekend off if someone dies or you're going to get fired. That's kind of the question. I kind of cut it forward.
Especially this other company I work for, where they documented everything, attendance, you know, tardiness, it all counted. And so, yeah, everything was under those conditions. And so this didn't have a place there. And so, yeah, I had to kind of fend for myself. And if I wanted to do this, that's the way I had to work.
So basically, you were using all your vacation days. You didn't have any vacation days left for sickness or to go on an actual vacation, right?
No, it was all for that.
Wow.
It was all for that. But that's an example of that. You know, for me personally, as soon as I came to work up here, everybody understood. Everybody said, no, you go right ahead. Because that's all I'd ever done. And so everybody understood what I was going to be doing. Everybody, you know, it was in a way though, we'd speak of assimilation, but then on the other hand, even if somebody was assimilating, we still were taking care of our own. Okay, you can assimilate all you want, but we still were together, even the ones that wanted to. And overall took precedence over anything. We still did things together. And unfortunately, that would being the worst of what we had to do was the death portion, but we took care of each other. We always did. Going back all the stories I'd heard, but then even in my time, things happened anyway when there wasn't, we didn't have coffers to draw from. Here, people would step up and do it. That's how it worked. And the reason why I know that is because even as a boy, my grandfather always had cattle. He always had cattle, as they did in Barona. That was like the emergency fund. And so more than once, all things put aside, even if they didn't agree on the political thing, even if they went to blows, they were in fisticuffs, people came to him and he helped them no matter what. He did it because that's what you're supposed to do. And his statement to me was, somebody has to do it. That was the catchphrase. More than once that was shown to me about that. First, he was, once watching him do that as a boy, and sometimes it would turn back around and they would still be at odds, but he did that then, just for that. That's it. The other one was Leroy. I want to say I was 16, yeah. And I lost my uncle, my great uncle, who wasn't from here. His daughter had grown up here, and we didn't have a lot of money. He died, and my mother had flown down here. She was the one kind of standing up and burying him. But we buried him here, and Leroy and I, we were close back then. And so we went to the lumber yard, and we went and he pulled out money, so $100. He bought all the lumber and built that outside box. That's how I learned how to do that, was from him. Built the cross. And my mother wanted to know how much he spent. I said, well, he pulled out $100. So she tried to give it back to him. He goes, no, he wouldn't take it. He was only making $8 an hour at the clinic. I knew it, but no, Leroy, man, you can't do that. No, it needs to be done. That's what he said, it needs to be done. So that, for being at that young age, it made me realize what that was, what all of it. If we weren't taking care of each other, then that, who was? We always took care of each other. Even in spite of all of that, we still do, even to this day. We have other things to draw from. The things I'm talking about don't exist anymore all the way, but we still come together.
You don't think modernity or assimilation or casinos, whatever it is?
Well, on one hand, you have that. On the other hand, you still have the thing that still exists that's always been there. Always been there, no matter what.
Eternal.
Well, it seems that way. You have that, and then you have the other. People, and I've been to other places where it's not so good. It's kind of rough, worse than here. But we're not perfect. No family is. We're not, we don't always see eye to eye, but we do the right thing. All of us do the right thing. I've always been proud of that here because I've seen places where they don't. It's not good. It's not good at all. So I'm proud of my own people for that. In spite of any of that, that is the one thing that, and that has always been, I'm 50 years old. I've seen, that's the one thing that's always been, and I hope that it's always there. I do my best to try to kind of perpetuate that practice no matter what, but that is true.
Which leads me to the question is, when did your political career start, and how long have you been in politics?
Oh, let's see. I did 2 years, 91, 92 as vice chairman. Yeah, the plaque, hence the, yeah.
You started out as vice chairman?
Yes, yeah.
You didn't even work your way up?
Well, ironically, my grandfather was a pretty tough guy. He's passed, but he was the kind of guy that he would just get it done. I guess would be the best way to characterize him. He was a mover and a shaker. He'd get in there and do it. I thought him to be kind of a tougher, kind of a man's man, almost a little harsh, maybe cold. But he's the one that nominated me for that first position, the first time. He nominated me for vice chairman. The only bad part about it was he didn't tell me he was going to do it. He just did it. And so he was always thinking ahead. And so he, you know, now that I think about it now, he was sort of developing me back then, making me think, making me work, you know, in a time where, and he was right. There's no real free lunch in life. So you have to really, you have to get in there and do it. So he nominated me then. I did one term and was out. And then
So I noticed it's 2 years.
back then it was only 2 years.
So what is it now?
4 years, 4 years staggered. They just changed it.
When did they change it from 2 to 4?
Just recently.
Really?
Yeah, just recently, just within the last few years, they voted on it. It's been about 4 or 5 years, I think.
And then how many council members and vice chair and chair?
Well, there's four. You have 4 officers and then 3 council at large.
So what are the officers?
Chairman, vice chair, secretary, treasurer.
Okay, so you have 4 officers and 3.
Yeah, 3 tribal council seats.
That's different than us.
Oh, okay.
I think we have 5 or 6.
Yeah, you don't have secretary, treasurer, I don't think, no. Yeah, we have 4 officers. I did that first stint there. I was out for, let's see, from 92 until 2001, so about 8 years. Then I came back as treasurer, 2001 to 2010. And then I stepped down and then came back now as chairman 8 years later. So this is my 3rd stint.
3rd one. Do you have a constitution here?
No, we do not.
Did you ever get involved in one at all or start one?
We started talking about it, but it's never got off the ground. I don't know that it's going to happen here.
So what is your view on gaming tribes' responsibility towards non-gaming, if at all?
I mean, they're still our brethren, no matter what. I mean, we pay into the whole revenue share. I mean, we field different requests as other tribes do, grassroots things, people, you know, needing help for gatherings to burials to everything else, and we do the best we can. I don't think we'd ever turn our back on our brethren, no matter what.
I guess the question I'm asking is, are we responsible for them, like financially, culturally? Is there any responsibility we would have because we have what they, you know, we're the haves versus the have-nots?
I mean, we take every request we can. I mean, I never viewed it in that way.
Maybe I'm saying the question wrong.
Yeah, I never viewed it in that way. We've tried to help, but I think it is more of a practice of the past, doing the best we can, you know, with what we have. And so that's part of it. You know, gaming tribes, you know, that comes with a lot of responsibility. A lot of people don't understand that. It's, you know, we do what we can. That's the whole, you know, and there in turn, non-gaming tribes that survive off of grants, we're still getting educated to that, you know, since the grant process is not so familiar with us out here. And so that's a tougher one. They have a more understanding of that. I've conferred with some of them too, regarding that and how they survive with their system, their grants, how they fund different things. Because they're still, you know, the truth is though, we've been here for a long time. We're still going to be here no matter what. No matter what program's in place, we're still not going anywhere. But yes, I mean, I think when you break it down, we still do the same things that we always have. We give what we can, you know, and in certain cases, you know, it even transitions to across the border sometimes. Although the system there is different, but sure, we've given a hand down there too.
What have we done for the Baja? You know,
I mean, the problem is we don't really have a mechanism that is fair across the board. And so that's the problem. They have what they call the ejido, which is more of an inherited piece of like a property or a township almost, where the reservation system, there's no one recognized government that represents them, and they fight. And so you end up talking to 3 different groups that say they're the leadership. So you don't know which one to quantify, and you don't know. And so, you know, sometimes, you know, you want to help, but then you don't want.
so they don't have tribal governments
No.
in our sense.
Well, the BIA makes us have one recognized government.
Right.
Imagine if that didn't exist, how many factions would come from that?
We'd have like 3 or 4.
That's what's going on down there.
Yeah.
Right. And so they make us recognize one government.
Wow.
They don't have that.
So maybe that's the one good thing the BIA did for us.
Well, I mean, in dealing with all of that, they don't have a sovereign piece of land that they don't have that. It can be taken from them. So it's tough. It's a tougher.
They don't have the trust.
No, there's no trust agreements down there. No. And you're dealing with more of a third world country too, so it's kind of tough.
So, what did the tribe do? Just 3 or 4 more questions. What did the tribe do to generate income before casinos, and were they successful? Let me give you an example. So in Barona, we had leaf mold, where we'd sell the topsoil in the oaks which was unsustainable, so we stopped. We had hunting licenses, and I'm missing 1 or 2 more.
Racetrack, motocross track. Yeah.
But nothing really to sustain a government. So, what did Viejas do that was similar to that?
RV park, oldest business. Yeah, it was Tarawa. Opened up in February of 1976. So it's still open. That was more provided jobs. There really was never an income that came from that. A lot of our people off and on, myself personally, worked. That was my first job, working up there.
Your first job was there?
Mm-hmm. Well, first one that I wasn't really supposed to be working, but I was still working. First one I ever got paid for was for up there. So they contracted through with CIMC too, so the youth started working there too. So it's been open the whole time. So from 76 to now, so what is it, 43 years, almost 44 years now. So I was actually there. I remember the grand opening too, but I was a boy, but that was the one thing that was constant. It was good because it gave the ability to leverage some things in emergencies. They could, in burials and things like that, they could intervene. Some other things, they had meetings. Some of our tribal meetings were up there. So if we needed things, it could go through there.
So was it a good amount of income as far as helping the tribe at all?
No.
Not really.
No. All it was, it provided jobs and it gave the ability to access an emergency fund if we needed it. That was it, pretty much.
So after that, so generally before gaming, nothing worked, like to support a government. And then after gaming, 99, so roughly 10 years after that, we have a recession, 2007. And I'm just interested on the impact of the recession for Viejas and how it changed things. I read an article from the New Tribune about the hotel plans being slated and then I guess altered to be a smaller hotel. Is there anything else you want to share about?
That's when I was in office, so I was right in the middle of that. So the crash, really 08 was that. We saw the decline in 07, 08's when it really we had this whole real estate crash and everything. It really had a really profound effect. So it changed the whole game. We made a mistake. So, and I will take responsibility for a good portion of that because where things started looking a little shaky, instead of trying to reinvest back into our business, we chose to stay status quo. Well, those in business know that if you don't refresh your product, your business is not going to go up, it's going to go down. That was the lesson learned. I knew that then, but it was, beholding to your members and everything, it was pretty tough. And so it affected a lot of lives. And so collectively, that particular council chose not to move in that fashion because if we did take that risk back then, it seemed like it would have a profound effect on people's incomes and their livelihood. So we chose to stay status quo, where we should have been putting back into the business. That changed a lot of things. It took, whereas other newer properties coming on could take your business. And so having the ability to go out and find another player and everything in this business has to do with how nice your property is. And so when your assets fully depreciate, they're not as appealing. And so that's something that I feel about that in that time. When I exited in 2010, that was my last year as treasurer. The reason why I did it is because there was a few things that had happened at that time. I lost my mentor in 2009, and I had taken a little turn on me. So I decided, because of a few different things that were going on at that time, that I needed to step away. And so when I stepped away, I decided that I didn't want to really be the messenger of the bad news that I was having to give, given the financial reports. So your people are pretty tough on you. And so I don't care about anything that happened or anything. I think I understand. But me personally, I needed to step away and do something different. And so in doing that, it cleared my head a little bit and made me understand that it wasn't me personally. It was, the times and, the messengers got killed. That's all a little bit. And so I just decided to take a break. It was an 8-year break. But part of that I blame on that, not moving, not striking when you needed to, when we should have been planning the next edition, or even, whereas your tribe went out and built a big, beautiful resort all at once and almost overshot the market and had the ability to maneuver in a bigger, newer facility. We were still adding pieces and pieces like that, doing it without a loan, whereas it should have been bigger and better. Gaming over the years, that's the way it works. We've seen it in other places in New Jersey and Las Vegas, where the biggest and the best gets the most attention. That's what happened. And so we should have been putting back into our business, and we didn't. So.
All right. So very interesting stuff there. All right. Any questions, comments about anything? Video.
He was talking. When he was talking. Sorry. When he was talking about the tribes in Baja, a lot of the U.S. government, the Mexico government doesn't even recognize those tribes as natives. So it's really hard for them to establish any sort, they don't even get any help from the government or anything.
Absolutely. So yeah, and it's kind of confusing, the Baja natives versus here. But I said earlier, they live in ejidos. It's like communally owned property for farming or agriculture. That's how I know it. So their idea of recognition is completely different. And to be an Indian in Mexico is to be at the lowest caste of society. And that's from the casta system the Spanish instilled. And that's what is not talked about when you talk about Spanish history enough. The casta system and the intrinsic racism in the Spanish society. And because what they say is this, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but it's relevant, is they were going to include natives in their society, whereas Americans were just going to kill them. And I've heard Spanish files say this to me, people who love Spain. And hey, well, at least they were going to include natives in their society, but they never stay at the bottom tier of society. So yes, you're a citizen, but you're an untouchable, if you know the Indian caste system. And so and that's how Indians still are. I had a student in my class, probably Paul and Alejandro remembers Coyote. He was a Mexican from Baja, not Baja, but from down south. And man, the discrimination he explained in class was real. And so yeah, so the Baja situation is. And am I going to cover that in this class? If I don't, I'll send a link. I'll create a video and I'll send it to you for the Baja. I'll do like 45-minute thing on the Baja and I'll send the video to you to do more on this. But yeah, John brought up a lot of interesting stuff in his interview. What do you think?
Can I ask about your question as to whether Viejas had a constitution? Does Barona, and what's the significance of that?
So everyone got, what's the word? Everyone has like a draft of a constitution. And some people have one. I think San Isabel has one, a constitution. Yeah, Hamul has one. But we have a draft. Sequan has a constitution. And this is all out of the Indian Reorganization Act. That's what John Collier wanted. He wanted us to set up governments like a board of directors more than, the way to look at a government and tribal governments now is a board of directors, right? You have your board members, they get voted in, voted out with a constitution. So it's all a colonial structure, for lack of a better term. And that's how I see it more than ever. And the Constitution was a part of that. But here's the problem with the Constitution. They're all cookie cutter. They're like cut and paste constitutions. And they're not inspired by us, by our traditions, by our government. And that's the main problem I have with tribal governments. The more I did this project, I realized, like someone commented, John Christman's an awesome leader. There's a lot of awesome leaders out there. And so it makes you wonder, well, what do I not like? And it's the structure, it's the colonial structure. And so these constitutions I would be okay with if they were inspired and derived from our traditions and culture. The idea of the Paipa as this third-party arbiter. Just for an example, because we have all this infighting now. We need to figure out conflict resolution. That's another topic, but I think the constitutional thing, I'm fine with it if it's just not a cut and paste. And that's what all of them really were. And a lot of tribes pushed back against the IRA. Like I said last week, we were the only tribe in the Mission Indian Federation, the Mission Federation, the Mission 29 missions. God, what's the terminology? Mission Indian Agency. Like there's 29 of us. We're the only tribe unanimously to vote for the IRA. The five that didn't were not there, unanimous. Now San Isabel's in the history books for ratifying the IRA with no one voting. So if you weren't there, you counted as a yes vote in San Isabel. So they ratified the IRA and their not the Constitution, but by people not showing up. And this is why people blew foul against Collier and these folks, because they were so manipulative. They wanted this to work so bad, they didn't care if we wanted it or not. And that's problematic if you're a native. Like, you can't be a native and be like that. If the tribe's not ready to do something, you don't do it. And the BIA, John Collier. So San Isabel is actually in the main textbooks of Native American studies for this IRA debacle where no one showed up and counted as a yes vote. Just a side note, but yeah, this whole IRA, but this is all relevant, right? This period of time, and so all of that comes to the fore. Any questions about that? Constitutions, IRA. So the idea of chairman, all that comes from this time, what we have now. Chairwoman, chairman, the structure. So I'll just end on, I'm gonna go through the slides kind of fast. because there's some things I didn't cover. And I have a lot of like kind of, I don't know, garbage on here for a lot. Can't think of a better word, but I was just looking at them and I really don't, there's a lot I want to change. But let's just go through them really fast. And so we talk about the splinter group. John did. Shahuk means 10, but there was actually 15 or something like that, 12. No, it was percenters. And it worked out to like 12%, 15 people, 12%. And so one thing Ramon Ames is he urged unity. So, and think of it this way. So here's a moment in time, and the Shahuk group is a good example where everyone could have just disappeared. Like, look, I'm going to take my money. I'm out. You know, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And assimilated and went in. So here's a moment in time where we chose each other as a people to make a reservation. And so it's like really almost like an interesting moment in time, like we're a trial, a test, if you will. And so 99 problems and water is one. That's how I talked about this. That's the Flume. And then they got caught riding dirty. I got a lot of hip hop terminology in here. Sorry, I was going through something right there.
Wait, can I see the Flume again, please? I'm sorry.
Yes. So that's the first Flume before the dam.
But who built that?
That's the San Diego Flume Company. And they weren't supposed to. They were denied, but built it anyways. In 1889, the San Diego Flume Company. And this was extremely, like, ridiculously inefficient. Water would spill out, you know, like 30% of it ended up in San Diego, right? So, like, we got to find a better way. And people would actually play in this thing in the winter, you know, summer months, you know, when it wasn't working. It was this huge flume, and it went through Capitan Grande, El Cap. So El Cap was known as this, you know, kind of going all the way back as this is where to get water. And they screwed us over again. They stole our water, and they got caught riding dirty. According to the U.S., so one of the things I talk about too is the assimilation thing didn't work in Cap 10 because we didn't really become farmers. And I'm going to go fast again, but we basically took off all the time for fiestas, for seasonal work. We're out, you know? So the BIA agents were like, dude, why don't they stay on their farms? And part of it was that we weren't getting the water correctly diverted by the Flume Company. The other part, it wasn't who we were. You know, we were pseudo farmers, as we talked about earlier in the first class. We were partial farmers, but not fully. We were never all the way. And so this idea of farming was crucial to becoming assimilated, because then you become sedentary. And the seasonal labor was in El Cajon, a lot of it. They had huge vineyards, picking season, and we're going to read about this in Medicine Man, where they had Indian camps, and from all over, and they would like become like almost like, you know, refugee camps. They were pretty deplorable at times. Some of them probably were more than better than others. You bring your kids, you know, it was like, you know, this was the time of the year to make money. This is before Mexican immigration, by the way. So Mexican immigration didn't start happening until the railroad was connected in central northern Mexico and to El Paso. So this is the time where Mexican immigration starts, but it didn't really take over. So we are still the main labor force, natives are, because we were doing the work no one else wanted to do, you know, just like today. And so, you know, you had these different ideas. Again, I'm going to go kind of fast of you know, George Washington, the ideal thing was to make tenant farmers. That's his idea. Jefferson was yeoman farmers. And so this is like the beginning of our country idea of what makes a perfect citizen, and farming was always in the mix. But we were not farmers, not in the Western sense. We exploited various food sources. And when you read Delfina next week, you're going to see what I mean. Delfina is the perfect book for this, because it will show you that we didn't need to farm. And Carrico said it like it should be a compliment that we weren't farmers. We didn't have to be. We knew better, you know. We shouldn't, because a lot of natives looked at like it's a dig on us. Oh, you couldn't farm. But he said, no, inverse that. You should be stoked that you didn't have to be a farmer. But this is important. The Protestant work ethic, we really didn't understand that we had to work for surplus, and that's the idea of capitalism where natives, I think, disagree, is this idea of working more than you have to. I got enough, I'm going to go party now. I'm going to a fiesta. I'm going to a ceremony. That's how we roll. There was more important things than money, than creating a surplus. So I'm just, this is, again, a little out there. But we did talk about Vine Deloria, the idea of creation stories, Kumeyaay values. Our idea of labor, land, and time was different. All this went against the assimilation idea. And the Flume company screwed us, though. They didn't give us ample or sufficient water for farming. So that's part of the reason why it didn't work. We talked about the Allotment Act. It was projected by 1920 we'd be gone. The Allotment Act was part of that, was that grand master plan to provide a path to citizenship, give Indians specific plots of land. You could start paying property tax, get rid of the federal trust agreement, sell residual reservation lands to outsiders. Win-win-win for the government. So when it came to allotments, though, and this is what's interesting, the Paipa family received most, Curros second, Quitacs, Peñas, La Chapas fourth. So you had 5 families receive 72% of the allotments. So you have this is the part where I start realizing the government started to change our structure by giving people more than over others, right? You have this kind of selection being taken place by the government. And I see this as an infringement on our old ways, our kind of power structure to some extent. That's how I see it anyways. You can see it a different way. So here's our allotments. We talked about these. Conejos was right here. I think the Paipa group was down here. See how there's 3 groups? Paipa's, because they had, and this is the one thing John, maybe he didn't understand what I was saying, is there were 3 graveyards, and Thorne writes about them. Because the bodies in Viejas were right here in the bottom of the river. That's where the Paipa group was, I think. I don't know. But there were 2 graveyards that were underwater now. This graveyard's still above water in the right. And this is the more nucleus of the family. The nucleus kind of shows a little bit more solidarity as a group compared to us. That's what some could argue. Wait a sec, where am I? Okay, but yeah, so one of the things I realized is Conejos was so different. They were a nucleated village pattern between the King and Conejos creeks. Evidence suggests the remoteness of Conejos people reinforce a more cultural conservative practice. So they're much more conservative culturally than us in Barona, and that's one thing it still stands today. So a lot of the decisions way back when, there's a legacy of them today, and that also has implications for gaming, like John talked about. We were a little bit more progressive back then with Ames and all that, our leadership, and it came into, so we had a different gaming experience in that same line of thinking. Whereas more conservative tribe like Viejas, they were a little different, little more reluctant to be so progressive. I'm not saying they're not progressive, but just less progressive than us. But everything has a cost, though. I want to make that a point. You can't have it all. Many Allotis, this is how they were, children were thrown in there. So one of the things that said to me that the Banegas and Rodriguez family showed up later from up north. So Inyaha, Mesa Grande, the Rodriguez is, Stan Rodriguez, he's from San Isabel, right? So you have our names kind of coming, our family clans coming from up north, because you couldn't really live in the mountains where it was harder to live. So you have people kind of moving around during this period. But I kind of disagree with this now that I look back on this, because like I said, Manuel Lechuza is here in 1895. Emmanuel Lechuza, and he turns his last name into Banegas, because we're Lechuza, and I don't think we realized that maybe we were already there and he invited his brother, Jim, who had a homestead in Mesa Grande. And so our family history is still kind of cloudy, just like everyone else's. So I'm kind of going to go fast. So, yeah, so I just talk about the Friends of the Indians, how they helped, like Helen Hunt Jackson. El Capitan Act. So originally, this 361,000 was for us. When I say us, I mean the El Capitan village of Quitac, Colmac, if you want to anglicize the name. So, and then it was decided later that the money had to be split between 2 tribes because the Conejos was contaminating the water table. So the sanitation engineer said, you have to move. And so this is all around the time the Mission Indian Federation has started, the same year as the El Capitan Act. That's not a coincidence. I don't think so. This is also the 1905, the San Isabel treaties being exposed, uncovered or unclassified. So anti-government, anti-BIA, anti-removal. The catalyst was the unratified treaties. That should be 1905, I think. So what the Mission Indian Federation wanted was, so the BIA used to regulate our marriages, believe it or not. Our health services were regulated. The Southern Indian Health Council is a legacy of that, but it's we own it now as far as run it. There's people on the board. That's why it's called council. There's a council member of board members. Like my Aunt Booty's on there from Oposta. You're going to see her interview. Welfare services, and they put a ban on fiestas. The BIA did, because this was right about the time they were worried about insurrectionists, I guess, or resistance from natives. So, and this was also the time of Prohibition, right? So it's crazy, you know, really changing pivotal moments in our history. Ramon Ames was pro-removal. He learned from his dad, you cannot fight the government. James Banegas, my great-grandfather, and Ames were both Indian policemen. And in 1919, you had to get permission from the BIA to hold fiestas for fear of political agitation. So Juan Leo, you're going to read about him in Medicine Man. He was an officer, just like my great-grandfather, and he was shot in Campo, just like my great-grandfather, James Santiago Banegas. And they were trying to break up. I'll send you an article, but they found someone who had a bottle, and it was illegal to have liquor, and they tried to arrest him. And the Mission Indian Federation had their own police. Okay, that's how crazy this was. There's a BIA police and there's Mission Indian Federation police. And they try to apprehend him. They try to apprehend this guy, and then they apprehend the police officers, the BIA police. So the Mission Indian Federation police officers apprehended these guys. And then a fight breaks down. This is the Campo Fiesta grounds in Campo. And my great-grandfather was shot. He died on his way to the hospital to Los Angeles. And Juan Leo actually survived. And there's a photo of him in the Cap 10 of him standing next to an Irving Gill house, actually, if you want to look at your book. So Juan Leo survives. He's from Volcan, or San Isabel. There's on top of the mountain there. So and he would move around to Mary Parcell. Mary Parcell was his step grandfather, and Mary Leo Gibson was his wife. So he died in an LA hospital, and so this really pivotal moment was pretty tragic for my family in particular. So Conejos, they were on the Federation side, vehemently anti-removal, and they set fire to their village to make sure they would not return. Just to give you a contrast. And the Paipa family they were said, you're going to drown me before I leave. And eventually they left, but not. And the reason why it took till 1934 was because of the Paipa family. It would have wrapped up when ours wrapped up. So in 1932, but that 2 years was simply because of that graveyard issue. and they weren't going to move. And you can see why when you understand how we understand death and our ancestors, and maybe there's a nude body that you just buried, right? Imagine how awful that would be to bury, uncover someone who just passed away. And that's something that John really showed me. But here's the thing. So we're still dealing with this legacy, the progressive and the conservative factions, the assimilated and the traditional factions, the modern versus the old school factions. And that's what I try to do, to use this LCAP, is I use it to tell the story of all of us, all reservations, all natives. And that's really what I hope you understand, is I don't want it just to be about LCAP, but it's also about John Collier, the BIA, what's going on at the time. And it's just and it's also about non-cooperation. So Viejas colonists were forced to leave, and their shanties were set fire. And one of the things too is they lived for many months in drafty barns. And there was great suffering in the winter of 1936-37. Because of heavy rain, snow, flooding, and unprecedented cold, there were many deaths to emotional distress and pneumonia. You talk about the Trail of Tears, we had it here, said Tom Hyde. And now go to Barona. Unfortunately, the people of Viejas suffered the most during their last migration, because we were a migratory people. By contrast, Barona was considered a designer reservation. In an unprecedented historical event, Barona was created to prove the BIA and Department of Interior were now more careful with how they dealt with Indians. Perhaps because of the development of Indian sympathizers like Helen Hunt Jackson, newspaper articles, it was not easy to create reservations in half measure anymore. So my point is now the microscope was on them, and they used Barona to make themselves look a certain way. And so we acquired the branch. It used to be, so Father Barona was from the mission. But our people worked on the ranch, and we knew the ranch, just like the people of Caneos worked on Barrelong Ranch. We were the seasonal laborers. We were the workers, the workforce. And so we would buy it. And it said 2,400. I have 2,000. So yeah, so there's that plaque in Barona. And if you want to go to Barona Museum, this would be a good time to go, because all this is in the Barona Museum. There's Bob Quitac. Him and Ramon Ames were the ones who did the deal. Bob was our second chairman. Ramon was the first. So Irving Gill, I told you, world famous. He built our homes with modern amenities, indoor plumbing and wood stoves. They're still here today. Our church was the first thing we did, and it's still here. So when you walk in there, it's a real sense of history. That's my grandmother, Lenora, her home. There was 15 of them, 15 families. And that's my dad's hero, because his parents kind of left him when he was young. And so he was kind of semi-adopted by her, raised by her. And my dad actually spoke Kumeyaay or Ipai when he was a kid, and he forgot. She told him to stop speaking it so he could get along in the world. And so here's an Irving Gill home, and yeah, that's the story. And I could keep going, but I don't want to talk my head off over here. So yeah, so it's interesting to compare the two. The Paipa family has been such a strong resistance force locally. That's clear. Look at how different it would have been without that leadership. Amen. Yeah. So yeah, and Ventura. So I also did Anthony Pico, which would be a great interview to show. But they come from the Ventura line. So the leadership you see now, in a lot of ways, is the leadership that used to be, and in Barona and in Viejas and in other reservations too. So there's a legacy of leadership that continues today that I found super interesting with this project. It was almost like an accident to find certain stuff like that, but it was cool. All right.
Can I ask a question, or just, I guess, yeah, ask a question?
Please.
I just or make an observation maybe, but I was noticing, in our reading, talking about that shift of narrative towards agency and resistance, and which is so different than the narrative that we often get taught about Indian history. And I'm just really struck by tonight, like this, like these examples of resistance that were really that we don't get told, and just how strategic and smart, and just like these really great examples that that I'm really struck by. Anyway, but the second thing was also, we're in the middle of this, crisis where people are having to turn to one another and make systems of how we're going to care for each other right now in the middle of COVID, and in the middle of this, end of capitalism, and all these things that are happening. And I'm just so struck by how the language of mutual aid and care for one another that we're hearing so often right now is so grounded in Indigenous practice, and is just woven into the fabric of that. And so just, I would love to hear, because it's clear from your analysis that, you also believe in like liberation principles, and using, these models that are here for us in this moment. And so I'd love to hear, if not now, at some future time, kind of about how that legacy has impacted resistance forms right now, locally or, nationally.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the one thing I probably got most out of this project, is how smart our leaders are, our people are, and how just strategic they are, and how together we are, how unified we are. And there's moments in time where you just really like, I would sit back and I'm like, man, like no one even knows, how smart a lot of these folks are. And one of the problems, the reason why, is because they don't have degrees. They don't have paper. They don't go to college. And that's how we measure someone's intelligence in this world, is by, okay, what did you go to school? You know what I mean? There's all these measures of success. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't see that as much as we would. And the other thing is, we just haven't heard the story. So yeah, I'm really struck by that as well. And the idea of agency is inspiring to me, and we can use it, and our people our confidence would be so much more. Because that's one thing. The other thing it did to me is, like, it made me feel confident about who I am and where I come from. Because a lot of, I think a lot of natives suffer from self-esteem issues, because, we don't have this, we don't have that. And our stories are always told from a victim mentality, and it always does us a disservice. So it's very, thanks for that comment, Blair. I appreciate it. Anyone else want to comment on that or something else? All right. Okay, so what I was going to do is probably end a little early, if that's cool. Everyone's good with that? Yeah. So next week, we're going to do something way more chill. I promise you. This is pretty tough stuff, right? Like, so next week's totally chill. We're doing Delfina. It's like you can read it anywhere, anytime. Super chill, super easy. And Delfina is going to talk about, in a way, a lot of the same ideas, but it's a personal story, just her life. And we're going to talk about basically food. Okay, so think of food when you think of Delfina, ethnobotany, and Shawi. So one of my favorite questions when I did this project was, I asked elders if they liked the taste of Shawi. Oh man, it was great. I'm gonna do like a remix tape of that, and just everyone's answer. Carlene likes it, huh, Carlene? Yeah. So all right. So we'll end a little early, everyone. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Everyone's awesome, doing well. Thank you for the reciprocity and the good vibes. So I look forward to next week. And you'll have a quiz. So I won't make it too hard. So it'll just be a little quiz on the reading. just 1 to 40. So, all right, everyone, have a beautiful night. Take it easy.